Good evening and welcome to Kunsang Pile Chilling. Tonight's teaching by Jetsunma Ahkon Lhamo is entitled Practicing Equanimity. And it was originally taught, I believe, yes, in 1990. So we hope you enjoy it, and it will begin now.
Well, today we're going to talk briefly about equanimity. How to practice equanimity, how one should consider equanimity, how it can become a part of our focus and how it can become part of our practice. Really where it fits into the scheme of practicing Dharma. When we practice Dharma, there are several different ways that we can practice Dharma, and most especially there are three different main vehicles of Dharma. One is the first teaching that Lord Buddha gave, the Theravadan or Hinayana point of view. And in that point of view, Lord Buddha teaches us to attain the egoless state, that is the actual cessation of suffering, to attain the egoless state. And from that point of view, in all of his teachings that came after that, he built up from that point of view. For instance, the Mahayana point of view, which is commonly associated with the second turning of the wheel. Lord Buddha then emphasized the accumulation of meritorious activity. And the accumulation of meritorious activity should not be understood as something that distinguishes or is different from the attainment of the egoless state, in that one is not separating oneself from this thought, but in the attainment of meritorious activity, of the active practice of compassion, is a development of the teaching on the egoless state, in that when one practices self-activity, when one considers all sentient beings to be as important as oneself, and when one considers the welfare of all sentient beings to be as important as one's own welfare, one is then actually practicing and ultimately attaining the egoless state, but simply uses a different method. And it's not such a different method, actually. If one understands the essence. If one looks at the practice, it seems to be different. But if one understands the essence, it really isn't so different. In the Mahayana view, one is encouraged from the start to develop a sense of equanimity about all sentient beings. Particularly, one is to consider that all sentient beings are equal, and that it doesn't matter what form they appear in. That sounds like a great theory, but as human beings, when we begin to practice that, we, in a very difficult way, it's very difficult for us to see that, because we think of ourselves as very well developed, very large, very intelligent. In fact, we greatly prize ourselves on our intelligence. And then we look at something like perhaps a cockroach or an ant and simply cannot imagine how they can be as important as we are. It's just inconceivable to us that they can be as significant in the great scheme of things as we are. But Lord Buddha states, in fact, that all sentient beings are completely equal. That there are physical beings that we can see, and they range from the cockroach to the human being and animals and whatever life forms that are visible to our eyes. But Lord Buddha also teaches us that there are many non-physical forms, formless forms, that exist as well. And simply because we can't see them with our eyes doesn't mean that they do not exist. In fact, they do. Some exist in forms that are forms but not visible to the eyes. Some exist in formless ways that are inconceivable to us. But there are 3,000 myriads of universes that we have never seen. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to us that there are many different ways to exist that we cannot imagine. According to the Buddha, we have one thing in common that is to be considered again and again and again, really important. And that thing that we have in common are common, I can't say human experience, common sentient being experience, sentient beingness, is that all sentient beings wish to be happy. And that they are striving, even at this moment, to be happy. Looks like we're just sitting in a chair. We're not striving to be happy, are we? Absolutely we are. Absolutely we are. We dressed as we did in order to be happy, whether it's in robes or whether it's in layperson's clothing, extremely beautiful. We act as we do in order to be happy, having somehow assumed from the experiences in our life that if we act calm, we will get approval, or if we act excitable, we will get approval. If we conduct ourselves in a certain way, that will be appropriate, and therefore we will be happy in our appropriateness. And there are many different other things that we've learned throughout our experience, thinking that if we adapt a certain code of ethics, since that code of ethics is approved of in our society, it will make us happy. Or perhaps we've gone to the other direction, and that also happens. That if we step outside the code of ethics that is appropriate within our society, that somehow we will be different, individual, unique. Always a great comforter. And that somehow in that individuality or in that uniqueness that we will be happy. At any rate, according to the Buddha, at every given moment, all sentient beings are trying to be happy. Now what about the cockroach? He doesn't know anything about unique. He doesn't know anything about norms. He doesn't know anything about how to dress up. Is the cockroach also trying to be happy? Yes, he is, in his little cockroach way. He tries to survive. In fact, they've done a darn good job of it. As a species, they continually strive to adapt themselves in ways that even though other sentient beings try very hard to kill them, and they're constantly putting raid out of business, even though these things are happening, they manage to survive. They have certain characteristic behavior that seems to be instinctive, but that instinctiveness has to do with survival and actually has to do with the organism's desire not to change, but to remain stable. And that desire is a form of reaching for happiness. No organism likes to face chaos. No organism likes to face death. All organisms wish to remain stable, at least to a certain degree. And that wish for stability is the desire for safety and happiness. Different kinds of organisms have different modalities, and they all seem to be very unique, and some of them seem to be not understandable. For instance, I read a story about a small insect called a midge. And I don't know much about insects, so I hope I'm getting this right, but I did read that the midge hatches its eggs inside of its body, and then when the eggs hatch, they actually consume the inside of the mother, and they become like a parasite, and that's how the mother dies. She dies feeding her young. Somehow, in a way that we can't understand, I mean, we would never do that. We would never feed ourselves to our babies. We'd think of something else, because that wouldn't be happiness to us. But somehow, in the world of the midge, that is the way that that species has chosen to survive or has developed as a means for survival. And somehow, for them at least, it means safety and stability in some way that we can't understand. And even the midge is trying to be happy. So from that point of view, and the Buddha also teaches us that their life means as much to them as ours does to us. Now we think we can understand that in theory, and yet how often do we swat a mosquito that's trying to bite us? I mean, all the mosquito's doing is trying to live. He just wants some blood because that's what he eats. But we think it's somehow okay to swat that mosquito so that he won't take a little bit of our blood. Do we really understand when we do that, that that mosquito's life is as important to him or her as ours is? I wonder how well we understand that. According to the teachings, therefore, if we are to understand that all sentient beings are equal, and that we have in common that we are all striving to be happy, and especially that to each of us, whether we are in the form or formless realms, to each of us, our lives are very precious, and we long for our lives, and we long for stability in our lives. As Buddhists, we are taught that we have to respect that we have to understand that in the language of the cockroach, the longing for his own life and safety are as important as they are in our language to us as humans. And so we are equal. We are also taught that inherent within every single form of life, and please excuse the terminology, don't think that by that I'm excluding the formless realms, because it's also true in any formless kind of life. Inherent within each life form, all sentient beings have within them the potential for Buddhahood. The seed of Buddhahood, it's called a seed. And it's very much like, if you, in keeping with the season, if you look at apple trees after they get their blossom, when the blossom falls off, you have something that's like almost a little wart at the end of a branch. It's tiny, tight little green thing. You can't possibly look at that and think it's ever going to be an apple. I mean, not the red, juicy thing that we eat. And yet, that little bump at the end of the branch, where the blossom used to be, is the hard seed that has within it everything necessary to become an apple, other than the appropriate catalytic circumstances. Time, sunshine, seasonal influence, these things. But everything's there. When we look at all sentient beings, we are required to understand that that's true for each and every one of them. Just because we look at this little cockroach and we don't think much of them doesn't mean that it isn't entirely possible that we on our path could do a really rotten job. And then that cockroach who walks through a room, perhaps, where Dharma is being heard, might not form the auspicious connection, achieve a precious human rebirth, and practice a heck of a lot better than you do. It's not inconceivable that the very cockroach that we squash under our feet might someday be equal to Lord Buddha Amitabha himself, and you might be looking to him as a way to get into Dewa Chen. It's not inconceivable. So we have to treat all life in a respectful way. It's very difficult for us to do because as human beings we have an arrogance, terrible arrogance. In fact, I'm always talking to vegetarians, and mind you, I greatly respect vegetarianism. But it seems that vegetarians like to argue a great deal, and in fact they get very prideful about their situation. In fact, they can get unbelievably prideful about their situation. And I've had vegetarians come up to me and say, how can you even think that some Tibetans, for instance, will eat meat because, even though they practice Buddhism, because in Tibet there was very little vegetation, and one could not grow vegetation to any great extent. So Tibetan lamas will eat meat and sampa. So vegetarians have actually come to me and said, how can you possibly think it's acceptable to eat meat? As a Buddhist, how can you possibly consider that? And of course I would explain to them that on the Tibetan plateau, vegetation does not grow very well. Or if it does grow, it grows for a very small portion of the year and is very difficult to keep. And of course they can understand that intellectually, but still they think, how can you possibly be accepting of that? And I explained something that I have heard, that Tibetans on the high plateau that can't grow any vegetation actually look down at the farmers on the low plateau, because they think that if we were to grow, for instance, a carrot, just a simple carrot, when you grow a carrot, there are all sorts of minute, tiny little microscopic organisms that grow around the carrot and actually live in the soil. And in a whole field of soil, there are uncountable billions and billions, uncountable numbers of tiny organisms that live within that soil. So that if you plow up that soil to grow a field of carrots, you're some sort of barbarian. That you've really hurt all these tiny organisms who are the same as a yak that one might eat. In fact, we can live on a yak for almost a whole year if we dry the meat properly, but you have to kill billions and billions of organisms simply to grow one carrot. And so they look down at the vegetarians as being barbaric. It's an interesting thought, a matter of perspective. But the actual teaching that Lord Buddha gave is that while one should not kill, one should also be respectful and mindful that all life is exactly equal, equally precious, equally rich with potency, and should be considered as being absolutely on par with one's own self. While this is not a discussion on vegetarianism or on the benefit of meat eating, I'm not taking sides on that one way or the other. I am saying for absolutely certain that these are the teachings. As human beings, we have such difficulty with that. In fact, as human beings, we have great difficulty even considering all humans to be equal. I've had shocking experiences where people that I know are very kind people, who literally give you the shirt off their back, would do anything for you, are loving, wonderful, warm people. People who are actively engaged in trying to help others. I have seen people like that flip the coin and say, people who are in jail deserve to be there, period. Or have some kind of attitude about maybe Asian people, or black people, or white people. Or, in my case, I've met with lots of people that have attitudes about Italian New Yorkers. So we have all of these difficulties that we store within our minds, and even though we try to practice this teaching on equality, we find that, in fact, we have all sorts of prejudices within us. The Buddha teaches us that we must definitely root out these prejudices and go so far as to rid ourselves of the tendency to lay blame under any condition or to find fault under any condition. For instance, by the time you get to be my age, I'm 40, I don't mind telling you, by the time you get to be my age, you've got some real prejudices about things. For instance, you think that Some people are your best friends, that consistently they'll do anything to help you, and you've really gotten a lot of good result from a certain friendship. Perhaps you think that your husband or your wife is your best friend and that they're always kind to you. Or perhaps you think that your mother is your best friend. Your mother's always been kind to you. Or perhaps you think that definitely not your parents are your best friends, but only a certain friend that you met 2 months ago is your best friend, and they're kind to you. Whatever it is, everybody's got their own particular idea about things. And then we always have some person who in our life becomes like our nemesis. Maybe it's not one person, maybe it's lots of people. Maybe we have a whole series of people who are our nemesis. Maybe it has become our habitual tendency to make people wrong in order to get through our lives. That often happens. Certainly happens into very ordinary and very well-meant people. Some people, for instance, feel that they really have to lay blame to people who have been influential upon them as being the cause, the real cause for their suffering. For instance, it has become customary to lay blame upon one's parent, making the parent the real problem, and considering the parent to be something of an enemy. And then it also becomes customary to make some person the hero in our lives, and to have that person responsible for our happiness. That if that person were not to produce happiness for us, somehow we would not be happy. And that person becomes the savior if they do it right, and the next nemesis if they do it wrong. And it never really ends. It's a constant process of prejudice, and becomes actually a very deep habitual tendency, to the extent that one becomes utterly incapable of seeing what is truly beneficial in one's life, and even of acknowledging that one has the ability to create one's own benefit and one's own suffering. One becomes actually incapable of understanding that. So the Buddha teaches us that we should actually engage in practice to rid ourselves of that tendency, to practice an antidote to that. That is an extremely potent antidote, and wherever you find yourself practicing on the Mahayana vehicle that the Buddha has taught, you will find that it is required for you to practice in this way. So it's something that is a very basic teaching, and yet it's something that one practices until one reaches ultimate enlightenment. It is that important. And that is the practice of equanimity. Literally, we are required to think of ourselves as we are in our natural body and with our natural characteristics. And we should actually think of the fact that all sentient beings are suffering, and that we ourselves are suffering, if not from actual circumstances such as poverty and loneliness and sickness and those kinds of things. We should realize that all human beings, and we are right now human beings, that all human beings suffer from old age, sickness, and death. We can't get away from that. We all have that at some point in our lives. And we all suffer from impermanence also, in that even if we are happy, that happiness tends to be impermanent, tends to change. We suffer from the suffering of change. And that being the case, we think of ourselves with our current circumstance, and we think, I would like to be free of that. I would like to attain the state beyond suffering. I would like to attain the state of bliss, the state of the cessation of suffering. So wishing to attain that, we think, according to the Buddha's teaching, how must that be done? That must be done then by achieving enlightenment, because so long as one is involved in cyclic existence, the constant cycle of death and rebirth, one is always facing old age, sickness, and death. One is always facing the suffering of impermanence, in that all things within that cycle of cyclic existence are impermanent. They are ever changing, and they are transient. One cannot bank on anything in cyclic existence. So what we wish to do then is to attain what in the Buddha Dharma is called the thus gone state, or the state beyond suffering. We wish to cross the ocean of suffering and achieve the precious state of awakening to our own true nature, which is the state called enlightenment. So thinking that we wish to do that, we visualize in front of us those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that have themselves attained that precious awakened state. We visualize them in the sky in front of us, and we think of the lamas of the lineage who can come and teach us the method to attain that precious awakened state. And we visualize them and we consider them to be our hope. We consider that we will depend on them in order to attain that state. Then we take the thought further and think, not only are we in this predicament, not only are we in this situation, not only are we wishing so much to be happy and to be completely free of any form of suffering, but we look around us and practice seeing that everywhere we look, there are sentient beings as vast as space itself, uncountable numbers, both visible and unseen, that have the very same wish, with the very same strength, the very same real passion to be free of suffering and to know true and permanent happiness. So we think that everywhere we look, seen and unseen, there are uncountable numbers in the same situation. And so we visualize or try to imagine that they are standing in front of all of these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as well as we are. And we think that we are making offerings together equally, that they are wealthy with potential offerings to make, and that we are wealthy with potential offerings to make. And we visualize vast offerings, as vast as sky and space, offered to the three precious jewels, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, requesting the cessation of suffering for all beings. And so we think like that. That's how we actually begin the practice. And then out of the massing banks of sentient beings, we pick two very special sentient beings to come forth. One stands on one side and one stands on the other side. On one side, we have our most beloved one, the one who is utterly precious to us. Each person has someone like that in their life. Some one person that they wish from their heart would know happiness. Some one person that they wish would never die, wish would always be happy, would never be hungry, would never go without. Some one person that they wish they could love and protect always. There is somebody like that in everyone's life, whether it's a parent or a child, husband, wife, lover, friend, someone that is precious to us. Perhaps more than one, but even a mother has one child that they think of in a more strong way. It's not that they really love that one child more than another, but somehow they're closer karmically. They're like them. They've always been easier to raise. They've always been somewhat closer to their heart. So we should think like that. That person stands there, and that person for whom we would really almost lay down our lives, would give anything for, that precious baby, our beloved one, we think is standing there. And we visualize that one making offerings to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Then on the other side, we visualize the other person. The person who, although we never use the word hate anymore because it's become passé in the New Age, we never use the word angry anymore because we're beyond that. You see, we're spiritual. But that person who really bugs us to death, that person who gets under our skin, perhaps it's the boss who has the attitude. Perhaps it's the child that, as much as we've tried to help them, gosh darn it, they have just kicked sand in our face at every turn. We haven't been able to help them, and they've really pushed all of our buttons. Perhaps it's that one child. You know, parents don't like to admit it, but sometimes it gets like that. We don't like to admit it, but sometimes it gets like that. Or maybe it's our parent, the one that we blame, the one that's never loved us enough, the one without whom we would have been a better person, so we think, the one who dropped us on our heads when we were 10 years old and we've never been right since. Whatever the scenario is, that one who perhaps has been the real cause of all of our suffering. And perhaps we feel that we shouldn't make jokes about this. Perhaps we feel we have a righteous cause. Maybe our parent threw us out of our house. Maybe our parent was alcoholic. Maybe our parent was really ill in some way and really hurt us. On the other hand, maybe it could be the husband or wife that we're desperately trying to divorce. The one that, if looks could kill, would have been dead 1,000,000 times. The one that's really getting to us. The one that we wake up next to every day and think, if it weren't for you, I'd be a better person. That one. Whoever that person happens to be. Or perhaps we have a bona fide enemy that isn't very close to us, that seems to just appear in our lives somehow, like a Humphrey Bogart movie or something, and really attacks us. I don't know what your circumstance is, but I do know that everybody has one person in their life that they feel they would be better off without, and have a very difficult time and burn a lot of calories learning to understand. So let's take those two people. The first time that we try this, we're never going to convince ourselves that we feel the same about the two of them. We're never going to be able to do that. If we think we can do that the first time we set out to try this, from the get-go, then guess what? The first thing we have to do before we do this practice is work on delusion. Because it ain't so. We really don't feel the same way about these two people. But according to the Buddha, we have to develop equanimity. We have to develop this natural equality of mind. And it doesn't come through suppressing emotions. You should not suppress emotions in this process. The Buddha never taught emotional suppression. That's not what he taught. He taught understanding how it really is. Somehow we have to begin to understand the appearance of these two beings. And there are many stories in the Buddha's teachings about, for instance, a great arhat, or master, a realized master, who was able to look in his wisdom eye into the scene in a house. And I don't remember this story exactly, so please don't quote me on this, but it goes something like this. In this house, he could see a very pleasant domestic scene, not unlike domestic scenes all over the world. The husband and the wife are finished with their day and they're relaxing in front of the fire. The husband has one favorite son that he's waited for, and now he has this son, and he's always wanted a son, and he's very proud of the son, and he's sitting with the son on his lap. And he's not so in love with the daughters because he really wanted a son. And they've finished all their food, and they're all content before the fire, and the girls are sitting over there by themselves, and the boy is on the father's lap, and he's looking at his son so proudly, looking at his family so happily, so content. And the dog comes up in this scene, and he tries to lick the master's boot, and the master kicks him away because he doesn't want the stupid dog on his leg. And that's how it is. And the arhat, being as realized as he is able to look into cause and effect relationships, and is able to learn from that again, one more time, how stupid, how unreliable the appearances in cyclic existence really are. Because he knows, in fact, that this beloved son that is sitting on the master's lap in a previous incarnation was his murderer, and actually killed him and caused him great suffering throughout his life in his attempts to really hurt him again and again and again, and knows that in the future this child who the father is so proud of will grow up and leave him one more time, and that they will be suffering between the two of them. And the father, unwittingly, because things ripen in this way, will cause the son suffering as well. And he knows as well that the dog that came up to lick the master's boot was in a previous life the master's most beloved one, the most treasured child, the one who appeared in one life as a child and in one life as a lover. And that these two longed for each other, but because of the ignorance associated with cyclic existence, in meeting again, would not be able to recognize one another. Knows also that the two daughters were servants of the master, and that they served him long and well through long illness, took care of him, and deserved better than what they were getting, and that suffering would come from the lack of recognition in that relationship. There are many such stories. There are even stories about a fisherman that goes fishing in a pond, picks up a fish, thinks it's not worthy because it's too small and throws it back, and doesn't recognize his wife in a previous incarnation that he swore that through time and space he would never be separate from. Many such stories like that. And so if we study them enough, we come to recognize that things may not be what they appear to be at all, what they seem to be at all. That in fact the one that you hate the most, what you may be seeing may actually be the ripening of some ancient karma, but that you are also looking at the one that you love the best, and somehow are unable, in fact unfit, to recognize them. That it may be a life that in the past you have greatly cherished, and in the future you will come to depend on. Likewise, the one that you love the best may in the future hold some great suffering for you, and in the past may have been one that caused you great suffering, or that you caused great suffering. One that formerly appeared as your enemy and would have stood on the other side of you if you had done that practice before. Because in cyclic existence, things change. Appearances are greatly deceiving, and ultimately, all sentient beings at one time or another have or will appear as your own kind mother, someone very precious to you, someone close to you. Ultimately, we are the same. And this is the practice that we should come to understand this. The one that we wish to lay blame on, the one that we wish to hate, the one that it feels so good to hate or blame, the one that we cherish. These are the same. They are inseparable from us. They are precious to us, and they should be understood in that way. So while you know that you have these feelings in this present incarnation, and you don't deny them, you don't say, okay, now I feel the same about my enemy as I do as my loved one, and hope that it works out. You don't think like that, because that would be fake. The point of Dharma is not to dress up like a person practicing Dharma. It isn't to fake it. It's not supposed to be an artificial experience. We're really supposed to get this stuff. And the way that we're really supposed to get it is through understanding. The teaching is this, that if we have prejudice, if we hate, if we think that one is less than another, it is only through our own ignorance, and we should come to recognize and accept our own ignorance when it's staring at us. Come to understand that if we blame or if we have such difficulty, it is due to our lack of understanding, and we should take responsibility for that lack of understanding and try very hard to understand better. Not suppress feelings, but understand the facts, purely the facts. And the facts are that cyclic existence is not understood, that what appears to be may not be at all, and that in fact the appearances that are seen are artificial constructions based on prejudices that we have anyway. But according to the Buddha, all sentient beings are equal, that they have the potency of Buddhahood latent within them, that they will someday realize that potency when circumstances ripen properly, and that we ourselves may come to depend on them. Furthermore, all sentient beings, because we have lived countless times, we have had at some point an important relationship with them, that they have at some point actually been our own kind mothers. According to the Buddha, we have lived that many times, and that we should come to understand that appearances being what they are, it is up to us to understand that all sentient beings are equal, and that they yearn. So for their sake, we practice, and we practice with equanimity. Caring as much for and hoping as much for the enlightenment of one's own kind mother or one's own beloved one. Caring equally for that one's enlightenment as we do for what we think appears to be our enemy. That even upon seeing someone hurt us and blame us and judge us, we should develop the depth of understanding that should allow us to understand that what we're really looking at is a reflection of the past, of the fact that somehow we've hurt them in the past, or they wouldn't be that angry at us, or they wouldn't be hurting us, or circumstances would not arise as they do. And we should long for their enlightenment with equal fervor, and in the same way that we long for the enlightenment of our best beloved one. The only way that we can really do that truthfully from the core, without faking it, is to learn the facts. To learn the truth of cyclic existence. That it simply comes up the way it comes up, and appears the way it appears, according to our prejudices, but that all sentient beings are the same and equal, and that they have meant many things to us. The Buddha teaches us that literally everyone you see has been your kind mother. Think of it, your own kind mother. And due to the birth given to us by our kind mother, whether it was from an egg or from a womb or under whatever circumstance, somehow we have stumbled upon this present circumstance which empowers us to practice the teaching that produces enlightenment. Therefore, to all mothers we should be grateful, and for all their sakes we should practice. So that practice of equanimity is most precious. And whether we are Buddhist or non-Buddhist, some of you here are Buddhist and some of you are not, we can practice that. We have the power to do so. We should think in the way that I've just described and begin now. One need not be a Buddhist to begin to accumulate that pure perception, that pure quality, to incorporate it into the life so that it becomes a daily, ongoing effort. But I can tell you right now that it won't come naturally if one does not actually set aside some time to think on these things, to really practice them so that they can become a part of us. They won't automatically be a part of us. We won't naturally feel the same way about an enemy as we do about a loved one. That isn't the human condition, and we should be accepting of that. So don't expect yourself to feel that way and then be mad at yourself when you don't. But instead, study the facts. Understand how it is in cyclic existence. If you do that, if you sit down and contemplate equanimity in the way that I've described, and do the visualization of considering the enlightenment of all sentient beings to be equally, gradually, over a period of time, the circumstances that arise naturally in one's life will change. Enemies will become naturally more benign because you've cared for them. And that's how cause and effect happens. Beloved ones will still be beloved, but without the partiality and passion that we feel that makes us blind sometimes, because we'll understand that they are the same as all sentient beings, and they are precious also. Circumstances will arise in a natural and clearer way. Not tomorrow, not next week. It will take a great long period of time. Another good reason why it's important to start now. So I hope that you will consider this teaching and begin to practice accordingly. If you just hear it and walk away never practicing this, it's useless to you. You've wasted your time and my time. But if you begin in some small way to begin to think like this, then I hope it will bring you benefit. In fact, I'm certain, I know that it will, if you have the persistence to continue and practice accordingly. So thank you very much for coming and for being so patient.
So thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join us again. We do offer these teachings by Jetsunma. We replay them live on Wednesday evenings at 7:30 and Sundays at 11 a.m. If in between those times you want to watch more, they are available for you on YouTube. So please enjoy. That's where we show them. That's where they stay. So we invite you to do that. We also have meditation offered on YouTube every Saturday and Sunday morning at 10 on weekends. And there are some of those available on YouTube as well, should you just feel the need to meditate with somebody during the week. That's always a cool thing. Also, sorry, my voice. We offer Medicine Buddha every night at 7 p.m. on Facebook Live, and I believe also now on here on YouTube. So I just found a whole bunch of them on there and realized that they're double streaming on both Facebook and YouTube, which is definitely possible. So either place you want to go, 7 p.m. You can join in a very short Medicine Buddha practice and help alleviate all the suffering that's going on from sickness on this planet. And, of course, you'll be praying for those that, you care about as well, and others will too. We have soak offerings, which is a food offering ceremony, on every day, essentially. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays are at 5:30, and Tuesdays is at 4 p.m. These are in the afternoon. And then on weekends, Saturdays at noon and Sundays at 2. Hard to remember all those numbers, but if you go to our website, tara.org, which is in the chat, and you go to the page on Meditate, Pray, Study, and it's the calendar. It's the KBC Maryland Events Calendar, I think it's called. And just go in there and click that page. And not only will you find the place that you can usually watch these off YouTube, but you can find that on the calendar, the event, if you click on it, will give you what venue it's on. For example, the food offerings are on Zoom. It will give you how you get into it, and also it will give you a link to download the practice so that you can keep up. So we invite you to join us should you wish to. This weekend, this Saturday, we have Rigzen Dupa, which is for Guru Rinpoche Day, and it's this Saturday, December 3rd. It will be at 2:00 p.m. It replaces the regular offering but it's because it's Guru Rinpoche Day, we do the longer practice. And you are welcome to join with that as well. So hoping that you do that you come, that you can come visit with us. Not only we are open outside every single day from dawn to dusk, and you're welcome to come and walk the land and see the stupas, but also we are open now inside on weekends from 11 a.m. until 4 p.m. And we invite you to come into the prayer room and sit and meditate with us or join one of our practices. So please come, please stay healthy, and we'll see you soon.